What's going on, and welcome back to Beyond the Hustle. So, today we have an incredible guest, someone who spent nearly a decade coaching 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, helping them optimize their subconscious minds for success. So, Jake, I'll kind of let you introduce yourself, but what really kind of struck curiosity with me is like when we were having that conversation, you kind of told me you were like the male version of Wendy Rhodes, right? And I love that because I'm a big systems guy, and creating a human optimization tracker is something one of my mentors did, and he called it
Sure.
or named it Wendy Rhodes. So
Oh, too
that was
funny.
inspirational.
I love that. Thanks again for having me, Dustin. I'm excited to be here.
For sure, man. So yeah, just kind of let everybody know kind of who you are, what you do.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for the introduction. My name's Jake Kauffman. I'm an executive life coach for men specifically. So I work with 7, 8 figures entrepreneurs, CEOs, executives, like you mentioned, to optimize for their subconscious mind so that they can elevate to higher levels of success with greater ease, so that they can lead more effectively, delegate more proficiently, and be better when it comes to decision making, which of course all of those things combined together are what get our results. And so when we think about behavior change or mindset optimization or peak performance, what determines all of those things? It's our belief system and our identity. And so once we recognize that, we realize very quickly that we can't outperform our belief system. And so, in order to achieve long term sustainable results, better results in this case, right, we have to shift our belief system. We can't optimize for our behavior at the level of behavior. And that's unfortunately where most coaches are supporting their clients at the level of behavior, trying to support them in adopting, for example, new habits, new patterns of behavior, right? Biohacking, what have you. Pretty big trend these days, has been for a minute now. But what typically ends up happening, in fact, studies show that 90% of people will end up reverting back to their former level of behavior after the coaching has been removed. Why is that? Because as long as we're trying to optimize for a behavior at the level of behavior without addressing someone's unconscious belief system, it's always going to be incomplete and insufficient.
Yeah, I love that, and you explained it very well. Even with me, for example, for the past stuff that I've done and the clients that I work with, typically it is dealing with we are our biggest roadblocks in whatever it
100%.
is in our own life, in our relationships, in our business journeys. And I feel like we subconsciously condition ourselves from such a young age, whether it's from hearing the word no or our parents telling us stuff and just our beliefs of our environment, so that when we do start to increase our output in life, we're still conditioned to that old way of thinking, and that really holds us back from really being able to perform at the level we could be performing at. So
Correct.
I love that. What kind of inspired you to land on this, to start helping, if you want to call it like an executive lifestyle coach or high level entrepreneurs? What inspired you to get into that field?
A great question. Well, I mean, first and foremost, because I was one of those high level entrepreneurs to begin with, I started a healthcare technology company with a couple of other founders back in the mid 2000s. Grew that company very, very quickly from nothing to over $4 million in business in about 18 months. So, really rapid growth. That company now has over 400 employees, which is great. But as you can imagine, and if you're, an entrepreneur listening, or if you're a founder listening, you know that in the beginning, it was a lot of growing pains. And so it became very clear to me, because I had been in the personal development world for a number of years prior to entering into the healthcare startup world. So it became very evident very early on to me that all of the roadblocks, or at least the most notable roadblocks that we were encountering, all had to do with interpersonal dynamics. Didn't actually have to do with our systems necessarily, or, you know, anything else logistical or operational necessarily. The majority of it had to do with, right, the psychology of the people that were running the business. And, if you're familiar with Tony Robbins, he says that success is, 80% psychology and 20% strategy. So I have this awareness coming into this rapidly growing business, and I'm seeing all of these interpersonal dynamics that are holding us back from operating at our best, and therefore as a company growing as efficiently as we were capable of being. Because although we were growing fast, there was a lot of breakdown that was occurring, which is very common when you have a rapidly scaling business. But nevertheless, it exposed us, right? It
Mhm.
exposed what wasn't working on an interpersonal level amongst all of the leadership team, including myself. So that prompted me to take a deep look at myself and try to understand myself better in terms of like what was holding me back from performing at my best, from performing at an optimal level. And I didn't have to go very far because I already had a lot of context to go back to because I had been working on myself for a number of years, started going to therapy in my mid 20s, hired my first coach, went to multiple workshops like Tony Robbins, UPW, et cetera, which I'm sure a lot of people listening, if you haven't gone, you've at the very least been exposed to that type of work. And what I realized was I have a deep-seated story when it comes to being taken advantage of because growing up, I was sexually abused. And so, as you can probably imagine, I developed this very intricate protection programming that was specifically designed to prevent that incident from happening again, but it had me holding people at arm's length.
Mhm.
That's going to end up creating breakdown in any type of relational setting where communication is required, vulnerability is required, say, for example, in a romantic relationship. And so not only did I start to experience the breakdown within myself and how I communicated and interacted with other team members at the startup, but I started to notice how it was negatively impacting my romantic relationships and how I started to repeat various patterns across different relationships. And, you've probably heard this before, like I was the common denominator. And so I was like, okay, if this is true for me, this is likely true for other people. So that was an invitation to go deeper into my own personal development work. But the more I started to do that within myself, the more I started to realize this is what everybody needs. And you alluded this to yourself when you're like, we are our worst enemies. We're our biggest roadblock, right? That prevents us from achieving what we want to achieve as quickly as we would like to achieve it. Such a timely conversation given the new year and everyone's making resolutions and setting goals for what they want to accomplish in 2025. Statistics show that over 85% of people are not actually going to accomplish what they set out to. And so that's what sent me down the path of desiring to help people through these various things, because the more I started to work on myself, as you can probably imagine, the better everything in my life started to work. The better I started to perform at my job, the more satisfaction, the more fulfillment, the more intimacy and connection I started to experience in my romantic relationships and even in, my personal relationships with friends and family. And so it kind of had this ripple effect across my life. And so when you think about, if you're a business owner like you, like myself, what is the core of your business? The core of your business is you. Well, what is the core of you? Well, that's your inner work. And so that's what sent me down the path to doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing it with us. I couldn't agree with you more in regards to what you said about when you start getting into the self-development world. You start finding holes and cracks inside of your internal self, but it makes everything else smooth, right? Relationships get better, work gets better, like all of these things get better when you start working on yourself. For even throughout the past 10 years of me being having mentors and stuff, I feel like every coach needs a coach and every mentor needs a mentor, because I'm one of those believers that you need to lead from the front as a leader should,
Mm-hmm.
and lead by example.
Yep.
And I would never be a hypocrite by telling someone to invest in themselves if I'm not willing to invest in myself first. And as you do that, there is no stopping point, right? We
Yeah.
have no ceiling. It's never
Yep.
like, I'm done. I'm the perfect version of me. We always have room for growth. So you're always going to learn something new about yourself on these journeys and on this mission. And I like to call it's the mission of life. You're just trying to see at what is the highest level that I can actually perform? Like, what is actually possible? What am I actually capable of? And your level continues to increase the more you fix the internal. Like, that's what I've learned going.
Right. Because you're increasing your capacity as the more you work on yourself, you're increasing your capacity to experience more opportunity, more love, more financial abundance. Right. If you've ever read the book The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, he talks about this at great length when it comes to the fact that we all have a threshold in terms of what we feel safe to receive, in terms of love and intimacy, in terms of money and opportunity, before our system begins to register it as a threat. And we see this in lottery winners all the time, right? Their results dramatically supersede their belief system in terms of what feels safe to them and their identity, right? Because now all of a sudden they've come into, oftentimes millions of dollars, right? And we know that the average, lottery winner in terms of socioeconomic status is lower middle class, right? And so now all of a sudden they come into incredible financial abundance. But what ends up happening, they end up spending that money incredibly frivolously as an act of self-sabotage, AKA self-protection, so that they can return to what is normal and familiar, right? And we see this in the results. The average lottery winner is right back to their former level of abundance, right? Their financial situation within, on average, like 18 to 24 months. That's quick. That's fast. And so in my work with executives and CEOs, we proactively seek to expand their capacity to receive more, such that as their business grows, because these are very growth-minded people, they're very ambitious, they have big goals for themselves, for their business, for their company, for their employees. But the problem is, if their results, just like with lottery winners, dramatically supersede their belief system and their identity in that moment, it's not a matter of if they're going to self-sabotage. It's really just a matter of when, for the sake of returning to the status quo, right? Because that's the primary goal of the ego, is to maintain the status quo. And the best way for it to do that is to hide the truth from you.
Yeah, I love that. It's like success without fulfillment is just like failure with different branding.
Right. Yeah.
And like most entrepreneurs, they're chasing something deeper, but they just really don't know how to access it yet. I've had these conversations before, and I would typically turn to the terminology that they're just not emotionally mature enough yet to understand how to manage the money. I like how that was worded for sure.
Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it. That's definitely true. And I would just offer that in my work with men, it's a lot more nuanced than that, simply because most men are ambitious to the degree that they struggle to be present. So their ambition is actually, and I see this time and time and time again, I've been doing this for quite a long time now. Their ambition is just a proxy for something else. Most often, it's acceptance or feeling included. Something in that realm. There's an unmet need that they are seeking to fulfill by way of greater success. Now, the caveat with that, there's nothing inherently wrong with ambition, with success, with wanting to achieve great things, right? I think in many respects, desire is simply expansion seeking to express itself. Right. So there's something inherently great or noble about desiring to be a better person, to be a better business owner, to be a better father, to be a better husband, etc. But it's the unconscious motivation that lives beneath the conscious desire that we want to tap into, because that is reality. That's the real reason that drives men's ambition. It's not what we say or what we verbalize, right? That's connected to what we know. But it's our unconscious that's responsible for what we do, that's connected to who we are and our character. And so when we reveal that, that's when we can actually create transformation around what has happened and gone into shaping the whole of who we are, and undo this protection programming that has a lot of men, and you alluded to this, strive for success and become successful in the process of doing so, but experience a fundamental lack of fulfillment or a lack of peace and happiness or a lack of intimacy in their relationship. I mean, how many successful business owners do you know that really struggle in their relationships, specifically at home with their wife, with their husband? It's commonplace. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're looking to their business, or they're looking to, the next level of success to fill this internal void that they haven't fully reconciled yet. And they're unconscious to it because so much of this goes back to childhood.
Yeah. So, and that's very relatable because I've been through it. And to the majority of the listeners, at some point in time, I'm sure that they have, if they own a business or if they're building a business, or it's inevitable at some point in time, I believe. So
Yeah.
for me, after making the pivot from being an online fitness coach to doing business consulting in like 2018, I was committed to the cause because I knew what was possible. And so I was determined to make it work and to make as much money as I was previously making at a higher scale. So I sat down in the office, and my 8-hour days turned into 15 and 16-hour days. And it was to the degree of my wife bringing me food downstairs or me not eating at all. And then my wife coming in at 10 p.m. saying, "Are you coming to bed anytime soon?" And me saying, "A minute," and continue to work. And of course, it caused issues in the relationship because there was the lack of intimacy on my part, to where she felt almost abandoned because I was giving work more attention than anyone else in the family. And I didn't realize at the time the damage that it was causing. I thought that I was trying to do something good by creating more abundance for finances and the freedom, but at the end of the day, at what cost?
Right. Yeah. The conscious intention was pure, right? But
Mhm.
the underlying unconscious motivation likely different, because as you mentioned, ultimately it was whatever was going on beneath the surface, right? Could have been a number of different things, was causing you to be out of balance in your life, right? Where you're giving so much more to work, but simultaneously like ignoring what I think we can both agree is most important, right?
Right.
Your relationship with your wife, with your family. And so, we find this all the time with men, truly. And, I'm certainly not coming down on anyone when I say this, but unfortunately, the whole faith, family, fitness movement has actually, however well intentioned, it's actually made this worse, because really all it's doing is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So you have men who go from being overweight, out of shape, right? There's a lack of balance in their life. Maybe they're working too much, like you were at one point in time in the past. And so all they do is they go from being addicted to these things to over here, where it's like now they're addicted to optimizing for everything. Right? And so they achieve outwardly, externally, they achieve these things that they set out to do, right? More work-life balance, right? More connection with their family, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they oftentimes find themselves feeling the exact same way, and they don't know what to do about it, because all we're doing is shifting our priorities and our external behaviors, but we're not actually addressing what resides beneath the surface. It's kind of the plight of every weight loss coach, right? They're supporting their clients with losing weight, and they do, but what often ends up happening as a former fitness coach, yo-yo diet, right? They gain the weight back. That's true for most people, because we're not doing anything to address the interpersonal or the emotional that went into causing them to overeat, or not prioritize their health and fitness in a way that led to them being overweight in the first place. And so
Right.
we have to address the underlying adaptations, compensating strategies, protection programming that goes into, like I mentioned, creating the whole of our personality that causes so many men to be outwardly, externally successful, but internally deficient.
And I agree with you there, because a lot of fitness coaches do that. And in my mind, we're trading one addiction for another at the end of
Correct.
the day. That's what it breaks down to be. So you don't necessarily need more strategies. You need to rewrite the stories in your subconscious.
100%. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a place for strategy because, you know, you can't you can't optimize your mindset for an ineffective strategy. But, when we look at what people are prioritizing the most, they oftentimes have it backwards, right? They're putting 80% of their focus, their energy, their attention into optimizing for the business and operations and everything that goes into being able to scale a business. And then they're putting like 20% of their time into themselves and the interpersonal. In my experience, the more you do that, yes, the more everything else in your life starts to work. But the beautiful thing is that your priorities start to change. You realize that what you're looking for out there on the other side of a 7-figure business, or taking your business from 7 figures to multiple 7 figures, etc. On the other side of your New Year's resolutions achieved, everything that you're looking for out there is available to you right here, right now. And yet our behavior suggests that we don't actually believe that, right? We assume that our happiness is out there, or our peace and our fulfillment is out there. And so many men, at least this is my experience, is they achieve what they set out to, but they're like, oh, why do I feel the same way? And for some of them, like, why do I feel even more empty? Even if my life is somewhat balanced, right? Well, it's because you haven't actually addressed, or at least done enough work on the interpersonal component.
I have a friend slash old mentor that kind of shared his story, and he had a goal in mind that he wanted to continue to grow his business, hit a
Yep.
million, hit 10 million,
Yep.
and he waiting for things to change. And he thought that when he had the Miami penthouse, when he had the Lamborghinis, when he had
Yeah.
all these things, he thought that something was going to change in him, or something drastic was going to feel different. And at the end of the day, everything was the exact same. And
Exactly
so
the same.
for me, it was like, okay, so the fulfillment doesn't come from chasing the profit, it comes from chasing the purpose. And once you hit the purpose, now you're in alignment with what you actually want to do. But you have to change the internal, or nothing externally will ever change regardless of circumstance.
That's 100%. I mean, you're speaking to hedonic adaptation, which is that beyond a certain threshold, I think it's like, it used to be $90,000 when they first did the study. I think if we were to adjust for inflation, it's probably like 120, maybe 30, somewhere in there. But beyond that, our happiness dramatically increases when we go from, like, the median income in this country, which I think is around 45,000, when we go up to like 130-ish thousand dollars. When they first did the study, like I mentioned, it was 90. Beyond that, though, our happiness doesn't really increase the more money we make. It's very negligible if you look at the graph. And so, well, then becomes the question, well, how do you incrementally increase your capacity to experience a greater degree of happiness, peace, fulfillment, connection? It's the interpersonal work. It's addressing the internal barriers that are blocking you from experiencing more of those things. And so when you realize that our primary task is not to seek after success, it's to seek after and find the internal barriers within us that stand against it.
Yeah. Everybody's number is different when it comes to revenue. What might be expensive to some might not be a drop in a bucket for others. And my opinion from a financial aspect is that once you're making, like, I'm talking revenue in a business, not necessarily personal income. Once you hit that 30, $40,000 a month mark, like, nothing changes. The money doesn't matter anymore. It all
Yep.
does the exact same thing.
Yep.
And in my opinion, making more money definitely won't make you happy, because the goal isn't the money. The goal is the opportunities that money unlocks for you. Like,
100%.
being able to free up time, being able to delegate or hire a team, being able to travel and kind of do all of those things and enjoy life at another level, but still being miserable on the inside is not worth all of those things because now you're getting to experience that, but you're still not happy. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. When you work with 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, just looking at it in totality, like what is the most common thing that you see as a mindset block in those high achievers? Like if you could, just do it on an average.
They think that they are pursuing one thing when in reality they're unconsciously pursuing something else. Because you implied this through your statement. What you really want can't be bought. And yet, despite consciously knowing that, unconsciously, so many of us, including myself for a time, didn't actually believe that. So we just continue going on playing the money making game or, the pursuit of success game. That game kind of needs to fall apart because the longer you play it, the more you start to realize that the high performance game that most men are playing was always meant to fall apart for the sake of something greater, for the sake of something more fulfilling. As you mentioned, beyond a certain threshold, more money is not going to impact or affect the way that you feel. So when you pair that awareness with the realization or the understanding that what you really want can't be bought, well, then you can actually start to seek after and pursue right what you're really after. And in my experience, what it most oftentimes boils down to is the acceptance or the approval of mom and dad. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard men say on phone calls with me that the first $1 million that I made, or I'm realizing now in speaking with you and coaching together, that the first $1 million was to either prove someone wrong, right? Whether it was dad, whether it was their brother, whether it was, their haters or their friends growing up, or it was to prove themselves right, that they could do it, right? But that's all ego. It's the ego that needs to be right, because the ego is primarily focused on being separate and superior, right? And looking good, right? And so, right, it's our desire to say that, like, I have a 7-figure business, or I did it, I made $1 million in a year, right? That we begin to start to see through that. And we start to see it for what it really is, which is a proxy for something else. And so oftentimes in coaching with men, we do a couple of retreats per year, and we take men out into the backwoods in nature, and we take their phones away from them. And it's an incredible catalyst because, as you can probably imagine, when they're forced into the depths of thoughtful self-reflection, that's when what's actually really going on beneath the surface is able to come up. They're no longer able to hide behind work or their busy schedule or time spent with family, and all the logistics that go into picking the kids up from school and taking them to soccer practice and cooking dinner and putting them to bed. Now all of a sudden they're forced to be with how they really feel. But there's so much beauty in that because that's when they're actually able to reconcile and address what is going on within them beneath the surface that oftentimes they're unaware of. And in doing so, after the fact, they're able to access so much more peace and happiness. That money was more money or more a better car, a nicer house, like you mentioned, was never going to do the trick, right? Because nothing outside of us can give us more of what we already have.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, again, like very relatable. And I'm sure as it is to many business owners, not having a phone, or just not working for a period of time when that is the norm, you feel different. And I'm one
100%.
of those people that like high achievers, for example, or people that are just constantly go, go, go. When you separate yourself from what you think your identity is, and typically that's work or your brand or the
Yep.
status or whatever it is, when
Yep.
you separate yourself from that, and let's say take off work for a week and do nothing but like do family stuff, not go on a vacation and travel, stay at
Yep.
home,
Yep.
put the phone to the side and just do that, like you'll meet reality really quick. And typically give me 10 or 15 minutes and I'm like, dude, I'm so bored. Like, what do you guys do all day? Like, what do you guys do?
Yeah.
It's insane because I've done it, and it's one of those things, it's like, ultimate goal is to be able to delegate and step away to get more time back. Even though that's a goal, like, there is no end to that because you're always gonna find something to do.
Right. Well, because we always return to what we practice. And
Yeah.
so, despite the goal that you just mentioned, right? If you ask any entrepreneur, it's like, what do they ultimately want? Oh, I want time freedom, spaciousness, time spaciousness. The problem is that if you actually force them into that situation where now all of a sudden they have time spaciousness, like you mentioned, take a week off, don't go on vacation and distract yourself with a different set of things as opposed to
Mhm.
work, they can't handle it. They can't handle it because they're so used to working and by extension relying on the distraction that is work, that when they do take that time away, they're forced to confront how they really feel and the emotions that are residing beneath the surface that are simply waiting for the space to come up. And so this is, I swear to you, the hardest homework I ever give men is to sit in silence in a room alone, no phone. It is the hardest homework. It never ever fails. And so, the Italians, they've got this really beautiful concept in their culture called, I believe it's called dolce far niente. And it translates to the sweetness of doing nothing. In our culture, especially in the West, we don't have a concept for that. We all crave it. And again, if you talk to most entrepreneurs, they would say that that's what they're ultimately pursuing. But if you don't practice that, when you finally circumstantially are in a position to be able to do that or take advantage of it, you won't, because you'll return right back to what you've been practicing, which is, you know, working, going, doing, right? Hypervigilant doing as an avoidance strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, even yeah, it's so funny. Even going to a place where things are a little slower. Let's say, for example, for context, you live in a big city where the pace is very fast, and then you move to a smaller rural town where everything
Mhm.
is slow paced. You're on the road, you're like, go, 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 go. That's the way your brain works, and that's just the way that your internal moves as well. Like, very, very similar. But
Yep. Yeah, your
so
nervous
like,
system is just beginning to mirror your environment.
yeah, exactly.
And if your dominant disposition, depending on your personality type, so many of the men that I work with, their nervous systems are actually addicted to intensity. And so the intensity that they typically crave is like growth in business, optimizing for their health and fitness, quantum leaps that we glorify. We glorify this in the world of high performance, in the world of entrepreneurship. We glorify that big leap or getting to that next level. But again, the more you start to optimize for the internal, the less you actually have to go in pursuit of what you want. And what you want starts to pursue you. You're just disconnecting from this hyper vigilant game, this high performance game that has so many men burnt out, overworked, overwhelmed, and unable to relax. Like you mentioned, you put them in an environment where they're forced to slow down, but their nervous system is wired to intensity.
So how do you train? Okay. So is there a way to train your subconscious to where you can control the nervous system to slow it down and adapt and be okay with doing something like that?
Well, we got to get to the root of the issue, as you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
In short, because there's obviously a payoff to that behavior pattern, that way of being, of doing, of living, of like waking up at 5 a.m., the rise and the grind, you know, even working 8 to 10 hours a day, right? We've normalized that in our culture and in our society. And yet we report some of the lowest levels of happiness. And when you start to look at other cultures and other countries who report the highest levels of fulfillment and happiness, one of the big things that sticks out right away is they work significantly less than we do. Anyway, that being said, they're not actually in pursuit of greater success or more money or a bigger business. That's what their ego has convinced them that they are striving for, or even impact, right? Even changing more people's lives oftentimes. That's not the real reason. That's the real reason. That's the reason that they're consciously connected to, right? And so we need to dig beneath the surface to identify the underlying unconscious motivation. But then where does that come from? What is that rooted in? And what we oftentimes find is that it's ultimately in an attempt to overcome a lack of self-worth or deeper insecurity. I have yet to work with a man, a high-performing individual, where the push, 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 the go, 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 do, do, do is not an unconscious attempt to claim victory over their pain. Well, once we know that, once we actually acknowledge what the pain is, well, then we actually have to do something about it. Most people think that once they've connected to, it's because, for myself as an example, oh, I was abused growing up. Okay, well, I'm aware that there are rats in the attic, but that doesn't make the rats go away, right? Now we actually have to do something about it. We got to get the rats out, and then we got to do some cleanup work and potentially some renovations. And that's where the real work happens, truly. It is, first of all, uncovering what resides beneath men's ambition. But then once we become aware of what that is, now we got to do something with it, right? Now we actually have to create healing in a way that puts in a new foundation. And that's the big issue. And like I mentioned with the faith, family, fitness movement, not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, because there isn't. We should all strive to invest more time in our family. We should all strive to improve, our financial situation and what that can do for our children and our children's children. All well and good, excuse me. But the problem is they're trying to build on top of the same foundation. The foundation being the soul or the spirit of the person.
Yeah. So, yeah, and basically, true success isn't just financial, it's spiritual, emotional, relational alignment. And that's kind of the foundation for everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist. I believe he was the first person that talked about life in terms of two halves.
Hmm.
So the first half of life is all about self-actualization and individuation, making something of myself, becoming successful, achievement, accolades, etc. So all men need to play that game. And we do. It's really important, actually, for young boys, especially teenage boys, to kind of play that game, right? Because it's how they develop healthy ego structure. The problem is you have a lot of 15-year-old men playing that game, but in 35-year-old men's bodies. The
Yeah.
second half of life is all about transformation and transcendence. You alluded to this perfectly, because that's when we awaken to a higher purpose and a higher power. And that seems to be the only thing that is truly fulfilling. It's not more money, right? How many times do we need to hear the same old story over again? I got everything I wanted, and yet I was fundamentally unhappy and miserable. And that was me. I achieved everything I set out to with the healthcare technology company. I was making more money than I ever had in my life. We went from nothing to a multiple seven-figure business in almost no time flat. And I was like, I am incredibly unhappy and unfulfilled, and I don't know what to do about it. Why do I feel this way? And so that's going back to like your first question around how I went down this path. I was like, I need to figure this out because, like I've spent years building this business and working really diligently to become successful for a noble cause, mind you. And yet here I am experiencing, this lack of happiness and fulfillment. If I don't figure this out, I know that this is only going to compound. It's only going to compound. It's only going to get worse. And so, that's why with men, it's about addressing the internal, because once we do that, everything else begins to fall in line and starts to work better, they actually get what they're really after.
Yeah, I like it, man. It's a lot of good stuff. So I like to do something basically rapid fire questions. What
Let's
I'm
do
going to
it.
do is I'll just shoot you a question and
Yep.
then you shoot me back an answer. So what's one piece of advice that you feel like entrepreneurs need to hear, regardless of where they're at in business?
If you're in a hurry, it's likely that you are addicted to the physical world of the ego.
I like that. What's the first step to breaking through a plateau as an entrepreneur?
Awareness. A deeper level of awareness is always the first step when it comes to making a change, when it comes to elevating our circumstances, whether it be in business or in our relationships.
What is one of your non-negotiables for the day?
Meditation. I've been meditating consistently for 7-8 years now. Not to get religious, but in the Bible, the first words out of Jesus's mouth, if you were to open up a Bible, it would say repent, but that's actually not an accurate translation. The original Greek word is metanoia, which means to disconnect from the mind or free your mind. And so meditation allows us to do that because it allows us to witness or observe our thoughts while practicing being non-reactive to them. So it allows us to break free from the mind because the ego hides in the mind.
How long do you typically meditate for?
30 minutes, because it takes 20 minutes for you to access delta, which is where you really start to shift out of fight or flight. And so this is actually a way that you can rewire your nervous system. So if you find yourself struggling with anxiety, overwhelm, right? We talked about the nervous system being wired to intensity. Oftentimes those are two outcomes. It is being addicted to stress and anxiety in order to get things done. If you're hoping to undo that, meditation is an incredibly powerful way for that to happen.
Okay.
It feels
That's great stuff.
counterintuitive and unproductive, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Until you start to feel the benefits of it.
Okay. So for part of the audience, people listening, and for me myself, give me a breakdown of what you would tell someone who's never meditated before, how they can slowly step into it.
Start with 10 minutes. That's it. Start with 10 minutes. And what I would suggest in that time is you're not trying to get anywhere. Because when I started meditating, I was very much monkey brain, racing thoughts. And I was like, I want these thoughts to stop. But that's not the point, because you're trying to direct your thoughts if that's where you go.
Mhm.
The goal is not to direct your thoughts. That's visualization, which is a totally separate thing. And there's a time and a place for that, absolutely, especially, for example, when it comes to goal setting or, vision work and creating, a more idealized version of yourself or a reality for your life. But with meditation specifically, the goal is to just witness and observe your thoughts and be non-reactive to them. Because what ends up happening, if you be with a thought or an emotion for that matter long enough, eventually what happens, eventually it passes. So that's what I would suggest. 10 minutes, disconnect from trying to create a certain specific experience for yourself. Whatever comes up for you in that 10 minutes is perfect. The goal is to just be non-reactive to whatever comes up for you and to notice how you feel. Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel discouragement? Do you feel tension, pressure, stress?
I feel stressed already and I haven't done it yet.
Well, and that's kind of the key to actually receiving more, is increasing our somatic capacity. Soma meaning body, right?
Mhm.
When I experience something, how does it register in my nervous system? Does it register as a threat, or am I able to relax into it? Meditation allows us to relax into a greater degree of dysregulation, which always typically tends to happen whenever we make a significant up level, or whenever we're on the precipice of a significant up level, because what comes with it? More money, more abundance, more responsibility, a greater degree of leadership. And if our nervous system isn't prepared to hold that stress, like I mentioned earlier on the show, it's just a matter of when you self-sabotage, not if.
Right. Well, man, this has been incredible. Great, deep, insightful conversation. Where can people connect with you if they want to learn more about you, your story, or your work?
Yeah, Instagram is the best place to connect with me. I am Jake Kauffman, so Kauffman is how you spell my last name. I would love to connect with you, chat with you, hear how this episode has resonated with you.
Yeah, and for anyone that's on the go, if you're listening to this in your car, I'll throw it in the description for you below. So don't worry about trying to write it down driving. We don't want an accident. So awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you, brother. And to everyone listening, if you found value in this episode, make sure that you share it and tag Jake and myself. But until next time, remember there's more, but it's just beyond the hustle.
Dustin, thanks.